So welcome everybody to today's final session. Delighted that so many has stayed because this might be the most interesting session of the whole conference. So I'm just trying to see if we can deliver on that promise. My name is Piva. I'm heading the TM Forum's Smart City program. It's my privilege to bring out on stage Andrew Collinge from the Greater London Authority. Please take a seat. We have Thomas Kruse from the city of Utrecht, who will talk about the IRIS project, a lighthouse project in the Horizon 2020 program. And final person, but not the least one, Martin Brinskov, the chair of the Open and Agile Smart Cities Alliance. So we're going to have an in-depth discussion about city platforms for the next 45 minutes. If we just take a step back and we think about city platforms and where we are with them today, I think it's fair to say that we have come to the place where they all provide a level of transparency into city operations and into what is going on in the city. But we have yet to take a number of steps to make them truly drive a local data economy, to make them truly drive local resident services, and to make them a part of the business fabric that is and should be a city. Not its citizens, its city agencies for sure, but it's also businesses. So how do we make these things come together? And how do we go from having these technical platforms to having curated digital ecosystems run by these platforms? Right? That is the challenge that I think many cities around the world are now facing. We have a tick in the box when it comes to transparency, but we do not have yet a tick in the box when it comes to creating curated ecosystems. So keep that in mind as we go through the discussion this afternoon. I would also like to remind you that you can ask questions to this team panel here by using your apps. I'm sure you've done it several times today already. But if you do, you can also vote on the good questions so we can ask the really serious questions to the gentleman up here. So the other thing I just want to mention and highlight to you is within TM Forum, we are an industry association. We work and we love to work with city associations like the OASC and cities, obviously like London and Utrecht. One thing we've done in our organization as of late has been to pull together something we call the City as a Platform Manifesto. If you Google it, you will find it online. Within the last 8 weeks, we've had roughly 90 signatories to this manifesto from global cities like Dubai, Barcelona, Chicago, Dublin, Wellington, and well, basically you name it. Cities all share one thing, they have one thing in common. They want to move in the direction of creating local data economies that are based on sound principles for how you basically create and drive these environments. So we have tried to enshrine these principles in 10 key principles in this manifesto. Please take a look. If you think these are right for you, feel free to join this movement because it's going to grow and become a quite powerful search, we believe, over the years to come. We'll get back to that shortly, but first, though, we'd like to hear about what's going on in London in the area of city platforms, and who could tell the story better than the man who actually has been part of building this over the last, or driving it over the last couple of years. So Andrew, the stage is yours.
Carl, thank you. And thank you for sticking around. There's people drinking beer outside, so quite frankly, I don't know what you're doing in here, listening to me, but I'll see what I can do to lessen the pain. In terms of what we're doing in London, I think one of the questions that I sort of often ask myself is how much you should sort of try and control if you're in a place like City Hall, this thing called the ecosystem out there that is a very sort of live and I suppose vibrant thing where activity abounds, and in a city the size of London, it's just a really difficult thing to control, quite frankly. And there are a number of reasons for that, which I'll sort of set out, but sort of key amongst them, and this is central to the story that I want to tell this afternoon, is that we have a sort of tremendously fractured city in London in terms of the public services and the way that they're delivered. Now, again, that's not too different from some of the other city jurisdictions, so I don't use it as an excuse, but I work in the Greater London Authority. There are 33 individual London boroughs who work very hard, day in, day out, delivering services, frontline services like adult social care to Londoners. The London borough that I live in has 400,000 residents alone, so these are big organisations with big responsibilities, and they are, they're the problem owners. They are the asset owners in a physical sense. They're the asset owners largely in terms of the data that is so important to making this ecosystem work. But they're also the opportunity owners as well. And in an organisation like mine, we have the opportunity, whereas sometimes the other public services don't, of actually being quite well staffed with people who understand machine learning and some of those advanced techniques that others don't have as much luxury to think about. So thinking about what we're trying to do in London, sort of whilst we have all, the positive but fractured environment, I think we're still aware that there's lots more that we can do with regards to creating a city as a platform and creating and getting the maximum value out of a very rich ecosystem that could be better organised. So people who've heard me talk before will have heard me talk about things like the London Data Store. We are trying to really push that on into a new space. So there is a secure data sharing platform that we now have available where people can bring new forms of data forward from different parts of the ecosystem, so private sector data, data increasingly held by individuals and generated by households, and we're starting through schema identification through that sort of facility to drive an open standards approach, or developing a common open standards approach, because that is one of the big failures in London at the moment. When we try to apply machine learning techniques or data science exercises to public sector challenges or public sector opportunities, from air quality down to tackling homelessness, so problems that we share across all of our municipal authorities, the data or the quality of the data and the regular supply of that data is still something on which I score ourselves as about 3 out of 10. And I'll give you an example here where we do work with private sector organisations. We worked with Nesta, the innovation charity, and a small data science company called ASI on this issue of tackling overcrowded properties and rogue landlord activities. Now, it took us 5 months to carry out the data wrangling, so getting 5 data sets from 5 of our municipal authorities into a position where we could carry out a data science exercise that passed in the blink of an eye. The positive side of that, after all that wait, is that we got public servants, housing inspection teams, to adopt new ways of working using data science techniques. And that, for me, is a really nice story about how you start with private sector engagement in the ecosystem, and you end up changing the way that public servants behave using new techniques. And there are other examples I can give you about how we're trying to tackle air quality, or the better measurement of air quality in London, and trying to understand what sensor networks we should deploy based on falling prices and new configurations, with the likes of the Alan Turing Institute, which is an example of where we work with academia. So there's lots of things that we do. We do still tend to be fragmented and ad hoc in our approach. Now, what we're trying to do in London about that is to create something called the London Office of Technology and Innovation. Now, the last thing that London needs is another groovy office space with brushed concrete floors and neon signs and ranks of data scientists. My view is that we have all the capacity that we need in academia, in the private sector, in small businesses, in large businesses. But what we do need to do is to make sure that there is a convening space, a collaborative framework in which we can start to bring together the demands of the public sector, of the tech sector, those people who, quite frankly, are more adept than ourselves at understanding technology and the trends in technology, and understanding what can be done with data through exercises like machine learning. So what I've tried to do, and I have a little test here, which if people heard me in an earlier session, you're going to hear it for the second time today, and I apologise for that. If you ask London local government, very senior leadership on the political side and on the officer side, if they've heard of blockchain, you get a room full of hands going up in the air. When you ask them a second question, which is what blockchain, tell me about blockchain, then they might mumble something about distributed ledgers and cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. That leaves half the hands in the room. But when you say to them, what is going to be the impact of blockchain on your key business lines and the communities that you serve, you will have zero comprehension of that question and you will not get a sensible answer to it. And that, I think, absolutely has to change in 2017. I think it's a matter of urgency that public services and the leadership of those public services actually is able to anticipate technology and and the disruptive business models that it creates, but then that it can also respond to that by setting out the key demands of it, so that we can not find ourselves in situations again, quite frankly, where we have to regulate after the event. That's government not doing its job properly. So I think there's a real important point here to make about the ecosystem and driving it harder and driving this notion of government and a city as a platform. It's about making sure that whatever we do is linked to political priorities like air quality and making sure that, in my case, Londoners have cleaner air to breathe. But that goes hand in hand with driving a stronger understanding, a stronger appreciation of technology and the impact that it can have on communities that we serve and the businesses, quite frankly, that we run. I've totally left my script, but whatever. It's the last session. And in terms of the work the body of work that organisation could carry out, I think it's a really interesting question. So there's probably really sort of high-end research and development that we could carry forward. Right on the other end of the scale, I think there's a piece of work that needs to be done in London around the general data protection regulation, which, regardless of our broader position on Europe, is something that will be enshrined in UK law. And I think we have to treat the general data protection regulation as an opportunity, and it's an important opportunity, and I'll make this my final point, about how you take the debate about how data in cities is used to citizens and households, because I think they need to be stronger, they need to have stronger control and say in how that data is used. And I'll close with a final example, and it's about, I think, the sort of big disruptive business model and what that might mean for this sort of notion of city as a platform. When you start to look at experiments or indeed real things happening in places like Toronto with their waterfront development, where you see the private sector, and I make no comments here on whether the private sector is good or bad, but they're coming forward with new plans for how areas should be developed, how sensor networks should be deployed, how data should be extracted from objects and buildings and individuals as they move around in that space, then that's great, and new business models will emerge from that, and it's up to government to make sure that data is available, and or more importantly, that data is treated in exactly the right way. Because, and this is my final point, I think City as a platform is a great idea, but City Hall needs to have the right place within the discussion about how that develops, because when things don't go according to plan, because this is an experimentation area, it will be that the fingers point at City Hall and not at the private sector organisations. So I'll end on that. I wanted to end on a positive note, sort of, but yeah, I've gone 1 minute over. I'm going to be quiet. That's probably the most positive thing I can do right now.
Thank you, Andrew. So we're going to come back to you on the data consumption side of this and how London triggers data consumers and whether it's possible to actually get to spin an ecosystem using this data, not just contributing it. So we'll get back to that question when we do the Q&A. But now, Thomas, please tell us about what's new and exciting in Utrecht.
Will do. Have I got a clicker for the slides? So, my name is Thomas Kruse. I work as a strategist for the CIO office in Utrecht. And I'll be telling you about our Lighthouse project and specifically the role of an urban platform within it. But before I get to that, I'll tell something about Utrecht, because I don't know if everybody knows Utrecht. It's about the size of the borough Andrew lives in, 300,000 inhabitants. And well, first of all, it's located at the center of the Netherlands, 500 kilometers from London, Paris, and it really is the heart of the Netherlands. So we got major rail, water, and highway infrastructures in the Netherlands. And next to it being the heart of the Netherlands, you could also say it's the brains of the Netherlands with the biggest university in the Netherlands and the most highly educated people. And runner-up to London, it has been elected the most competitive region of Europe. I believe the previous years Utrecht was as a region most competitive region, and that means that we're attracting businesses, and with businesses, of course, citizens. So we're the fastest growing city in the Netherlands. Here you can see some statistics. We'll be growing with, 20% in like 10 years. And that really, creates the challenge for Utrecht, because we'll be absorbing the population growth within the existing city boundaries. So we'll be living in and working in more densely in the city, which means stress on our infrastructure, our physical infrastructures, but also our social infrastructures. You can imagine the extra stress on mobility or energy or waste or security. So from that, really from this development, we've created we formulated our vision to be the city where healthy urban living should be the standard. Because how can we maintain the standard of living that we have now with all this stress coming to our city? So from there, we figured out and we made an approach on how we're going to realize it, this healthy urban living vision. And we see that, as a city, and I'll be talking about the energy system, we are not the player that can change such a system. We don't own the grid. We are no energy suppliers. So we have to work together with the stakeholders in our cities. And we have to co-create new solutions with them. We have to make the crossovers between energy to mobility to health. And last but not least, we have to innovate. One of the examples is that we're building a big project, a housing project close to the city center. And we calculated that if we would go ahead with the traditional ways of doing mobility, we would have 2.5 hours in the morning and 2.5 in the evening on extra, traffic. So we need new solutions. And to give you an illustration, the IRIS project, which has to do with the energy transition, is a good example of how we go forth with it. It started with started in one of the districts, Lombok, where citizens with an SME had the ambition to create a self-sustaining energy system. So they wanted to use their solar panels to feed it directly to their cars, and from the cars, because in the night you don't have solar power, of course, they wanted to feed it back to the house. And they created, their own ecosystem or consortium with parties like Nissan and General Electric, and they created the two-way charging pole. So they could feed the energy to the car, but get it back from the car as well. And that's really what we're looking for in Utrecht, the citizen-centric approach. So what's really what our citizens want to do. And it's, as a city, we of course want to be a green city. We want the renewables in our city. So we took it from there to create a consortium from the energy ecosystem, and we joined forces with the energy suppliers, the grid owners, but also housing corporations that wanted to do retrofitting of their houses. And we set forth to creating, to doing IRIS and a proposal for the Horizon 2020 program. And the main theme for us in the project is because you get all these new infrastructures and new supply and demand for energy in the system, and these new patterns cause stress in our energy grid. So the main focus is to create flexibility in the energy grid. So we don't have the spikes, we don't have to put in new infrastructure, which causes traffic jams because roads have to be opened. That's an important reason for us as a city to get involved. Well, of course, being it a European project, we broadened our ecosystem with partners in Europe. The main partners are Gothenburg and Nice, And we have some follower cities, and you can see it's nicely spread in the climate zones. We're working together with Finland, Vaasa, Voskani, Romania, Alexandroupolis, Greece, and Santa Cruz, Tenerife. So we made a proposal, and well, as Carl mentioned, we really did a good job in doing so. It was well, with excellent numbers. We were granted the proposal by the EU. A bit more on what we're really going to do in Utrecht. We'll be doing demonstrations. And here you can see the 3 demonstrations that we'll be doing on different parts of the city. And well, we'll be doing the infrastructure of solar power, vehicle-to-grid solutions, stationary solutions. And we'll be bringing it to the city, try to create new business models, in fact, that we can replicate within the city, but also can replicate to the other lighthouse cities. So that, in a nutshell, is what we're really going to be doing. And then you're wondering, this was about the platforms, so where do they come in? Well, the importance of platforms to us is to support these ecosystems, these infrastructures. In this case, it's the energy infrastructure. And what we see is that new solutions, new business models will be data-driven. And there comes in the need for a platform, because these new infrastructures generate new data, and we need ways to share this data. So in the simplest form, we want to create a marketplace. And that's something we've been doing for ages, of course, within cities. Create marketplaces, get an economies of scale going, but the difference is it's not the physical marketplace. So we have to create a marketplace for data, for digital. What we're doing with these marketplaces, we as a city want them to be open, so no exclusivity. We want them to be fair. So monopolies, that's something we don't want, of course, as well. And as was just mentioned, we need to be a place where you can put your data trustworthy. So it has to be compliant with GDPR and other legislations. So this is what we'll be creating within the IRIS project. And as Carl just mentioned, this is something we're doing in Utrecht, but we're doing it with these other lighthouse cities. But it doesn't end there, because you have to look from it from a European or a more international perspective. We need to create these platforms with cities, with industries, with academia. And what we're doing within the TM Forum is, of course, trying to create the framework in which we can really build these platforms. And here you see the 10 principles Carl just mentioned. I'm not going to read them aloud, but I suggest you look them up and read them, because they're really a good guidance for anyone who's working on the city platforms. And next to that, within the TM Forum, it's not only about these principles, it's on really creating the framework. And there, the methodology of creating this framework, it's really sound to me. I've been involved with the TM Forum the last few years on this methodology. And we really, and here you see the outline of it, and I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna explain it to you now, but perhaps we should do that another time, Carl. But this is really the work that we're doing, and we really want it to be something not only Utrecht, Nice and Gothenburg, but of course other cities and vendors, academia, to join in creating this, these platforms to ensure that healthy urban living, new solutions will be realized in our cities. So that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Thomas. We'll get back to the marketplace notion in the Q&A and see how you intend to explore that further. So before I'm letting you close this presentation session, Martin, just wanted to mention that the 8th principle in this City as a Platform Manifesto is about selecting open architectures and open APIs. That is an open way of building these platforms that leave room for a vendor-neutral approach and leaves room for innovation within the system as well. And I'm happy to say that we are collaborating with Open and Agile Smart Cities on precisely this mission. It's actually a press release that came out yesterday that is available for you if you're interested in the fact that you will be using these open APIs when you continue your path with the cities you work with. So Martin, it's a pleasure to give you a chance to try to make sense of what we said and see if that's possible.
Thank you. So you said I'd be closing the session. I think I'd be opening it up. And I know I'm between you and beers, so let's try and be brief. Thank you for the invitation, Carl, and thank you for being here. I think we all share the complexities and the ambitions of the colleagues, whether you're a city or you're, let's say, an ecosystem. How do we sort this? How do we, I wouldn't say manage it, but how do we get stuff done? So I'd like to know how many in here represent cities? All right. How many in here represent companies? All right. How many in here did not put up their hand? Right, okay, so I'm an academic, but I represent cities. Okay, so it's you guys having a conversation, making business to serve the needs of the citizens of these gentlemen's cities and the cities around the world. But how do you do that? But actually we have everything out there. We have a gazillion architectures. We have so many APIs. We have so many vocabularies. We've done the semantic web for ages. So actually the challenge, I think, is to try to see how can we reduce the complexity and find what could work across the board. So then you could ask, what's the role of cities? And I think actually, just to be brief, well, there are very few forces in the world that are as powerful as cities if they could come together in a somewhat coherent voice. And I think that's what we're having here with the TM Forum initiative and the different convergences around at least an attempt to have a coherent voice. So OASC is humbly trying to not be the only voice, but certainly be a very strong voice from the city side in defining not all the policy and the governance stuff, but actually very focused, technical, minimal, that's the point, interoperability mechanisms that could be helpful across all the efforts that we're having, lots of cities around the world. So certainly we need some APIs, but there's going to be probably a lot of them. So we need some artificial intelligence to guide us through. But again, with the semantics, with the APIs, how do we select, right? How do we curate this? Certainly the industry has had, a decade or two to try to figure it out and failed. I mean, you can go around and you can hear the crying salespeople going to cities and saying, could you please buy my city platform? We got all of that. And Andrew will say, yeah, you do, but you know what? I cannot just give you the keys to the city. Of course not. So it's about all the complexities, but in a manageable way, which is led by the principles that, cities are on. We work with everyone, and we're very happy to also be very, actually, I think, a little bit surprised that we got this year at the TM Forum Smart City Excellence event, the award for I think it's quite a weird name, International Body Impact Award. It sounds like the crash test dummies of the smart cities, but I guess it's something about global impact, and we're very humbled. And I think maybe we're not there yet, but it's at least the ambition to have a global impact in this quite complex situation. I think it's very nice to be recognized for. So 2 very concrete examples of what you can do when you actually have some minimal interoperability mechanisms in place. The first one is focusing on the citizen engagement. How do you do the co-creation of your city? Sounds like a virtuous exercise, but how do you actually do it? So this project, and it is a European project, but centered around the city of London, the city of Santander in Spain, the city of Aarhus in Denmark, is trying to make it easy, to experiment. Because, city planning is going away, and it's becoming a hit-driven business. It's going to be like, making mobile games. You'll make, 50 that will fail, and then 1 that is good. And that is going to be the one that hopefully will spread to a lot of other places and will make a market. It's very expensive to go around. If every city has to make all the failures, why don't we first of all make it easy and make it also easy to try things in different places. One very important thing is, of course, the privacy and the GDPR and that stuff, of course, but also who owns then the ideas that get created. I'm sure, you cannot just do it the Steve Jobs way when a good idea is sent to Apple. The immediate, reaction is to get a cease and desist letter, right? Don't co-create with us. So because actually, if you want to have a global business, you also want to, own the right to have it for yourself. And so actually, I think one of the nice inventions here is the legal framework around meddling around the boroughs of London with all this IoT stuff, and then actually making it work and working in other places. Yeah, very nice sort of ecosystem around there. What happens then when something works, that you actually want to have it in several cities, that you're someone who has proven that you have, I don't know, an air quality monitoring system or whatever, and want to easily show and easily deploy in other cities. This, copy-paste, of course, doesn't work in any way, but you still kind of want that, right? So that you, from a business perspective, actually have a global market, not just a fragmented, mess. So this is what Synchronicity, which is another primarily European Commission-backed project, is 15 million from the Commission and then 5 million co-funding from cities and companies it tries to do. So it's actually piloting stuff that works in a couple of cities, both in Europe and globally. And it's basically like shoveling shit. We just have to do it. But who will close the gap? Who will not just go out because you have a contract with an individual city, but actually do the piloting, do the readiness, the exercise, the engagement of the ecosystem, and then have sort of the sounding board of a global ecosystem. It brings together the EIPSCC, so all the lighthouses, the other initiatives that are in Europe and globally and so on. Lots of lovely partners. And hopefully it also, and this is actually one of the main outputs of these exercises, it creates sort of best practice and standardized ways of doing it. Now the problem is cities don't make standards. Do you have a standards department? No, why would you? You're there to get the mayor re-elected because it's a great city to be in. So I know only of, 2 cities in the world who do have a standards department, and most of them are like one-man operations, except for the city of Vienna. So actually, we should strive to standardize this, but not your grandfather's standards, because the standardization processes are way too old-fashioned for this pretty fast-moving target, and they're not suited for creating the market that are here. So how do we do that? Well, one thing is to come together in initiatives like this and ensure that the experiences of harmonization or specifications are actually collected and then put to the regional fora, like the standards organizations in Europe and US and Asia and so on, but also actually work on the UN level where there are some fora for this. And the last point I think is important is that we need to have sessions like this where the relevant players do come together. We have our annual conference. I invite you all to go. January 11, it's free, it's in Brussels. Bringing all of these things together in technical and governance and vertical sessions. But there are actually a lot of those. So I think the conversation, bringing the communities together, bringing the technology together, and bringing us together is really key things. So that's what we're trying to achieve, and we're very happy about the partnerships. We're all about working together, but not just to inspire, but in fact to make it practical so that you can go and work with your projects as instruments, with your innovation strategies and so on, but in a sort of orchestrated fashion. And that needs a lot of different people working together, and we are happy to do that with you. So we have to be civic. It must be the citizens and the cities' needs that are, driving this. Not necessarily the cities driving the standards, because then we won't have any. And it should be the common standards, not just say, yeah, we can do it, and we sort of don't care about what you do. Think of the GSM and the Wi-Fi and the Visa, these kind of super simple things that are having pervasive market creative forces. And it should be concrete. So the last point is we have to do things, because otherwise, I mean, paper tigers won't change the world. So thank you for inviting me to the conversation. I'd be happy to. Davor is here, and I think you can find links between these different initiatives. And I'd be happy to take this conversation further with many different stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Martin. So we're entering the Q&A, and it's going to be a brief but interesting Q&A, I think. So I'm going to start by asking Andrew a question. This question is it sort of goes a little bit along the principles of the manifesto we just discussed. One of the principles talks about how that cities should be part of curating digital ecosystems in the city, not necessarily operating or owning the platform, but definitely part of the curation and governance side. So my question is, the question is simple, the answer is hard. How do you curate a city ecosystem to make it operate by itself, to make it work?
Okay. Some of it I think I mentioned, in that I think it's incumbent on the city government to be as open as possible with regard to APIs, the architecture, open standards generally. And I made the point when I spoke as well about how I think it's really crucial in this moment, if you're to get any value out of the ecosystem, you've got to be crystal clear about the uses to which you want to put that ecosystem, where you want to go with regards to digital technology and data. And that's something that I think we've not necessarily got right in the past. Thinking about my job and how it's changed, and thinking about events like this, actually, we have to be a lot more political than we once were, actually, and making the connection between something like machine learning and political impact and votes might seem like an awfully long way to travel, but I think it's super, super important. The other thing that I think we need to do, and I'll make this my final point because we're low on time, and it relates to Martin's point about being concrete, under which you had, I think, a point about funding and financing, and I think, Thomas, you mentioned it. You mentioned it too. There is, for me, a real, if we're to do one thing in government, then I think we should be really concentrating hard on what the funding and the financial model should be to get a lot of the projects and programs that we've all talked about out of demonstrator land and into, these sunlit uplands of where these are proper, sustainable business models that work with cities. And again, that is where you get political capital. So I think that's really my point. Political capital has to be at the core of your thinking if you're a city who wants to run an ecosystem properly.
So let me inject another thought. What could we possibly learn from the private sector here? If we consider the platform business models of quite successful private enterprise that have established digital ecosystems, think Apple, think Airbnb, think Uber, they've all managed to establish a well-functioning model that also drives a network effect. And with the network effect, we actually mean the ability for, if you add an actor into the ecosystem, it becomes a better system for all involved parties. So the more people you get involved, the better it becomes. How can we use, Thomas, how can we use and draw from that learning in city platforms? What can the city do to curate ecosystems that goes in a similar line?
Well, to me, it's of course join forces with the industry who've done it to figure out or to.
Can you hear us back there? Can you hear us back there? Okay, good.
So, as I said, join industry, learn about how they created these platforms. So, and to me, as we just mentioned, the principles we put up within the TM are an important way in sculpting these new platforms. But we have to have a focus on a common challenge for the ecosystem, like the energy ecosystem, which focuses on flexibility in the ecosystem. And we need to know what the different stakeholders in these ecosystems, what their business models are. And we have to know upfront, well, what are you in it for? What's the benefit you're going to gain for being in this industry.
Exactly, and that must be, if you work for the city, that must be a discovery process in going in to try to figure out all these different actors in this system, what's in it for them, how can we motivate them to be part of it? How will you go about doing so in the IRIS project?
Well, the framework we laid out in TM, we'll be using it, and the discussion with the partners in the framework, within the project, we'll try to figure out. We have the conversations with them for what are the new business models you want to engage in. What is data needed to fuel your business models, and how can we create the platform that will be fueling your business model, and be open and transparent about it from the start of the project.
And I suppose one element of this, I think we are getting more and more silent. Maybe there's a limit on how loud you're allowed to speak. But I'm thinking when we do these things and we decide on a couple of elements that we all agree upon, which is basically the discussion we're having. So Martin, with that, how do we drive a global agenda? How do we make people agree on the same things? Just before you answer, just take this little example to heart. 20 years ago, the global telecoms market was a bit like the city's marketplace is today. You had every single service provider building his own systems, his own business model, doing it her own way. That all changed over the last 20 years. So how can we get cities to start working, not just sharing ideas together, but actually building common components together?
I think 3 very concrete things need to happen, and I think they are happening, at least gradually. So first of all, industry has to stop thinking they can fix cities and figure that out. So the political capital that you mentioned, Andrew, that's the starting point. I think actually the innovation comes from the public sector, from the decades of research and trying stuff out. But then that's the first thing, realizing that has to come from the guys who are doing things. The second thing is that what is then the commercial sector, the private sector function? That's execution. So I think the execution part on having that then to work globally should not probably be done by the cities themselves. It could be, but I think then the boosting of that should have that element. And the third thing is that we need then the companies and the cities who actually want the same thing, so the common goals. So I think that the private sector that sees this as an opportunity to have this future global market, which I agree is there, should share the mindset of those who have shaped the political capital. So with those 3 things, realizing that, we couldn't do it in 10 years, well, I don't think we can do it in the next 10 years from the commercial side. And then using what we're best at together. I think that's really the key. And it is what I'm seeing happening, but not all the companies do like that. Not all the cities think they have a role in sharing their experience and so on. But I think it's coming.
I think that's a hopeful message. But since I know that the last thing on your notes here were, message of hope, exactly. What message of hope would you leave us with, Andrew, before we close the session for the day?
What did I write after that? Again, I'd said it already. It's that cities really need to have a much stronger appreciation of technology and data and what we do with it. I fear it's not message of hope language, is it? Technology is bounding ahead, actually, and the regulation just cannot keep pace with it. But we need to do far more to actually appreciate what we can do with technology. That means partnerships. It doesn't mean staffing City Hall with lots of new expensive public servants. It means arriving at situations in which there are gain on both the City Hall side as well as the ecosystem side.
I think that was a fine message of hope. So with that, I would like to thank the panel a lot. You can talk to them. Obviously, Andrew will be out of a job very shortly, so he needs all the support he can get now. Thank you very much.